В чому новина буде з вас якась? Думала?
У нас одна новина.
Яка?
Подали повідомлення до МКС, яке призвало до ордерів на арешт.
Новина. Якщо у вас там є 20-40 нових кейсів, які можете чимось укріпити, або там попрацюєте конкретну історію, або, наприклад, що найближчим часом будуть проінтерв'ювані якісь там додаткові ці. Дуже важливо такі речі з новин.
Today is March 24. Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. My name is Vasyl Samokhvalov, and we will start our first briefing today. We will be talking about The Hague, specifically about the activities of the International Criminal Court and the arrest warrant issued for arrest of Vladimir Putin, and we will be talking to Ukrainian experts whose activity to a certain extent helped achieve this intermediary result. We hope there will be a final result. So whom we are going to talk about to? Roman Martynovskyy, lawyer, lead expert at Regional Center for Human Rights NGO. Today all the experts represent this organization. Kateryna Rashevska, international lawyer, legal expert at the Regional Center for Human Rights. Mykyta, Petrovets, lawyer at the Regional Center for Human Rights, and Kseniia Korniienko, lawyer at Regional Center for Human Rights. So let's start with Mr. Roman, who can give us more information about this achievement, this arrest order. Why was it issued? What is the contribution of your organization? And what should we expect next from this process? Please take the microphone. Thank you. I want to thank all the colleagues from Ukrinform, everybody who gathered in this studio. First of all, I would like to, well, I could not avail myself of opportunity to thank the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for this decisive step on the way of bringing the criminal officials of Russian Federation to justice. That was unexpected for us, specifically in my case, that the warrant was issued for the top level official, like the president. As to Maria Lvova below, we were convinced it would happen, maybe not as soon as it did, but we were convinced about that. For our organization, it was complicated, difficult and lengthy ways, which started back in 2016. It's been almost 7 years that we've been cooperating with the office of the prosecutor's office of the ICC, and back in 2016 our first application was submitted by us and by our colleagues from our partner organizations. It was related to the illegal transportation of Ukrainian prisoners who were in Crimea back then, and Russian Federation sent them to its own territory, which is a violation of international humanitarian law and a war crime in pursuant to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So starting from 2016, from the very first report that was describing the situation in Ukraine, specifically in Crimea, the prosecutor's office started mentioning this illegal transportation, and we were keeping submitting our new reports and applications with regard to, for example, illegal deprivation of property in the temporarily occupied Crimea. That's yet another war crime. Our reports also were in regard of use of the human shields, like civil population, that Russian Federation was using to capture our military units and the headquarters of the Navy, which was located of the Navy of Ukraine, which was located in the city of Sevastopol. We also submitted reports and applications about the illegal conscription that was going on in Crimea and other aspects related to transportation, deportation and colonization of Crimean Peninsula. And starting from 2018, the Prosecutor's Office of ICC already qualified those actions, those activities in accordance with the qualification that we proposed, which was pleasant to us, which confirmed that we were not mistaken in qualification of those cases, and we found support in the ICC Prosecutor's Office. Our organization is a part of the International Criminal Court organization for 5 years. It's an international organization that unites the participants from more than 150 countries, and it comprises more than 2,500 organizations, mostly non-government organizations. And in this case, we changed the tactics. We wanted to focus specifically on one person, not to submit all the information in a way we did it before. We didn't gather all the information regarding the prisoners. We were regarding only a narrow aspect of deportation, something that could be regarded as the genocide. And we focused on the personality of Maria Lvova-Belova, and we've demonstrated her connection with Putin, the head of the state. Well, we have to mention who Maria Lvova-Belova is. Maria Lvova-Belova is the Commissioner for Children's Rights in the administration of President of Russian Federation. So she is the person through whom Putin exercises his policy in relation to the children in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. I want to mention that Maria Lvova-Belova is not only one of the most active executioners or perpetrators of this crime. She's also an active documenter of her own crime. Everything that she was doing within those months, starting from April 2022, she reported on all of her activities. She made posts on the social networks. There were a lot of video materials in this regards, and she was documenting not only herself but the criminal activities of other participants of that crime, who are some governors of certain regions of Russian Federations, some persons who are local commissioners for human rights in the subjects of Russian Federation. And I want to say that we don't end our activities there. For the time being, this crime is not qualified as genocide, but we are convinced it's just a matter of time. And in the same way, it's a matter of time when the foreign leaders will stop shaking hands with Putin, and not like it was lately when Chinese leader was visiting Russian Federation. And our next step will be related to preparation of materials for report for racial discrimination and United Nations Committee for Human Rights. We will try to protect the victims of those crimes in these two committees, and the reports will be with regard to the fact that the children that were deported from Ukraine to Russian Federation, they were in fact forced to study under Russian education programs which influenced, which affected their identity. And once again, I want to thank my colleagues for their dedicated work, for their skills, for their knowledge, for this fact that now we have this achievement. Thank you. Thank you. Please pass the microphone to Ms. Kseniia. I will focus in more detail on the content of our report to the International Criminal Court. It was submitted on the 25th October 2025 in cooperation with the Lepkin Institute. There was a tremendous job done before this submission related to the collection of data and analysis of all the activities of Maria Lvova-Belova. This practice of deportation of children, it did not start back in 2022, but it was going on since 2014, and it was widespread in the Crimea, when Russia deported first 12 children whose further destiny is unknown. But this activity grew to a wider scale when the children started, a lot more children started being deported from Ukraine, and they were deported to more than 57 different subjects of 57 different places in Russian Federation. Maria Lvova-Belova was taking very active part in those activities. She cooperates with the governors of Russian regions and with the proxy governors of so-called occupiers administrations, and she does everything possible to have the civil status of those children and their nationality to switch them to Russian. So she was personally accompanying the children who were deported from Ukraine to the Moscow region first, and then in July and September the number of those children grew up to 20 persons. They were handed over to the Russian families for further education, and among those children were also children with limited capabilities. But to bring all of them to bring Maria Lvova-Belova to justice, we had to confirm her, we had to prove her concept. We did it in our report, and we demonstrated it in our report that she was realizing that she was consciously committing a crime while deporting minors from Ukraine to Russia. She was personally taking part in this deportation. She was accompanying the children using an airplane of the Ministry of Defense, which is another evidence of her connection with the top-level government officials. And as a Commissioner for Children's Rights, she should be acting in the best interest of children, but the way she does it is quite uncontrary. It's quite contrary to their interests, because children who were deported from the Black Sea shore of Ukraine, and if the child was deported to Yamalo-Nenetsky county of Russia, it's definitely not something that is done in the best interest of a child. Also, we wanted to prove that it was not only a war crime but the crime of genocide, and we had to demonstrate it. Thus, she was eradicating the children's identity, and we proved it in our report. And as we already mentioned, Maria Lvova-Belova by herself already provided enough evidences for this. For example, after the annexation of those newly occupied territories, she declared that all those children are now Russians, and she is happy to greet all of them in the extended Russian family. And in one of her interviews, she mentioned that there was a group of children, of 30 children, and they were all deported to Russia. First of all, they didn't want to say anything good about Russian top-level government officials. They were saying glory to Ukraine, but then as they were handed to the Russian families, they started feeling themselves Russian. She also adopted one of the children from that group, a 15-year-old boy named Philip. First she said he was not familiar with Russian culture, but then he was happy to acquire a Russian passport, become a Russian citizen. Also, to prove her liability for deportation and forced handover of Ukrainian children to Russian families, it was necessary to demonstrate that she was acting as a top-level government official, and as such she had to take all reasonable measures to prevent that war crime. But on contrary, she assisted to execution of that crime because she was taking part in demonstrations of DPR and LPR. She was heading relevant headquarters which were coordinating the deportation and further handover of the children to the Russian families. So she's directly responsible for that crime. Her actions were not chaotic. She was acting in compliance with the state policy of Russian Federation. She has personal ties with President Putin. She was appointed the commissioner right before the full-scale invasion, before the 24th of February. She is a trusted person, and he appointed her specifically so that she take that office and exercise this government policy of the handover of Ukrainian children to Russian families. Also, all of those activities evidence that her actions may be qualified as crime of genocide because her intention was to eradicate Ukrainian national group, and she clearly realized that those children would acquire Russian identity and become enemies to their native country in future. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kateryna. Yes, my colleagues have already told a lot about the previous work, and I would like to say what is about to happen next, because no one is going to stop. We have more and more works coming. My colleagues mentioned the Train of Hope. We were talking about the 12 children, and then the Train of Hope was there were 15 children, and then 19. That was a media project that could be documented, and now their former children's commissioner Pavel Astakhov, he left a minor trace. In 2014, he witnessed that there were 755 children left in the foster homes in Crimea. According to our information, there were 4,323 such children in foster homes in Crimea, and no one knows whether they were deported, whether they were transported and handed over to Russian families. So it gives us reasons to assume that Maria Lvova-Belova was not alone in her actions, but there were other persons, Anna Kuznetsova and Pavel Astakhov. Anna Kuznetsova is now occupying another important government office. She was imposing the Russian citizenship. She's the head of the Commission for the Support of Families and Maternity. She was also cooperating with the top-level government officials of DPR and so-called DPR and LNR, and they were handing over Ukrainian orphans to the Russian Federation on a large scale. So the first step is the bringing up of question about their criminal liability and responsibility. Also, Mr. Roman already mentioned about the local commissioners for human rights who cooperate with Maria Lvova-Belova about the families where the Ukrainian children will be handed over. They create some financial stimuli, and they stimulate the processes of this forced handover of Ukrainian children to Russian Federation, to Russian families. And now they submit some reports that children were handed over without documents, and the Russian families were happy to get such children, and those children whom we were able to return, they evidenced that that was a forced deportation, forced passportization. The great festival of this passportization, it was a show organized by Maria Lvova-Belova personally as a demonstration of her illegal activities. So all those local governors, the commissioners for children's rights, they're also guilty, and we worked to have them included on the sanction lists, at least on the level of European Union, and then in all the countries that keep tracking this matter, like New Zealand, Japan, and other civilized countries, we have to send a clear signal to those persons that they will all be brought to liability. International Criminal Court cannot persecute all of those persons. We're talking about dozens of persons here. At least 50 persons when we talk about regional governors and regional commissioners for children's rights. It all requires the mechanism of universal jurisdiction, the implementation of such mechanism in Ukraine. So we prepare our recommendations of how to unify the mechanisms on the level at least of European level, so it works in the same way. For example, the parents who left temporarily to the Western countries, to the European countries, they don't know whom to apply. However, this crime should be documented at the same time, so this is one of the areas of our activity. And we also have to remember that at the level of the International Criminal Court we have proceedings which regards the violation of the Convention for Prevention of Genocide. So we talk about Russian Federations committing genocide, but we don't say that they violated the convention. One thing is when we use a word in some wrong meaning, I did it, I paid the reparation, that's one thing, but yet another thing is when the country, when the state of Russia is claimed as such who tried to eradicate Ukrainian identity, and that claim will be put on them for ages, for centuries. And this is Ukraine who should do it, and we should talk about it loudly. We have to convince our allies, we have to provide the documented evidence of all of those things. So this is what happens now, what we should do to have those arrest warrants to be exercised. We continue our work, and in context of indoctrination and Russification of children, I want to pass the microphone to Mykyta, who specializes more in that, and then we will proceed to questions. Thank you. Good afternoon. I will add a couple of words about our activities. Our organization, in cooperation with another non-government organizations, made a study recently which regards this deportation and illegal transportation of children. So we have to understand that first is the transportation of children, their deportation, and their adoption by Russian families. We understand that is the process of ruination of their identity, and Russian education is one of the major parts of this process. All those children are put in that Russian environment, in the environment of Russian education, in Russian narratives. Those narratives are quite simple, they are typical for Russians, but they're non-typical, and they cannot in principle be used to Ukrainian kids, because they are being told, you have Russian identity, you are the patriots of Russian Federation, and thus you have this sacred obligation in front of Russian Federation. So the longer those children stay in the Russian information field, in the Russian system of education, even regardless this patriotic education thing, we understand that those children, one way or another, they start forgetting about their Ukrainian identity, or otherwise it's not even formed, because its formation is being blocked. So if we return those kids, we have to think how to return that identity, how to renew that Ukrainian identity, and what's most important is that we have to keep that in mind. And it's important to have that education policy which is guided by the occupational authorities in Crimea, for example, and in temporarily occupied territories. We understand that it's the policy of assimilation which is aimed at eradication of Ukrainian identity, and it falls under the definition of cultural genocide. We should not abuse this term because it's not a legal term, it's more like a theoretical factual term. It's not a crime of genocide itself, but it can be used as the evidence in this process. For the time being, we have an actual matter of the deportation of Ukrainian Jews, which can be qualified as the crime of genocide, and this educational policy of Russian Federation may be used as the additional proof of attempt of eradication of Ukrainian identity. So it's not a physical eradication, but it's eradication of mental identity. It's very important to understand it, and this is why we continue our work. What Mr. Roman already mentioned about the United Nations committees is the expansion of our work with the International Criminal Court, and the proof that this education policy is an evidence of this attempt of genocide. So there might be discussions about it, but there are options, and we have to remember about them so that it can be considered as a separate war crime or crime against humanity. It has nuances. Thank you. Thank you. Let's proceed to the questions and answers. So for what I understand, the secret of your success, or the success of your company, was that you were able to operate not only generalized figures, generalized study, but you focused on the specific person who is responsible and who fell out of our information space to a certain extent, because everybody discusses the arrest warrant for Putin, but no one says about the arrest warrant for Maria Lvova-Belova. So what should we expect? Is she really going to be arrested? What can be the further steps to be taken by the International Criminal Court? And how the establishment of their representative office here in Kyiv, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. Kostin stated recently that a representative office will be opened in Kyiv shortly. So how will it assist to the process? I want to say about the specific fact, specific person. The resolution of the Nuremberg Tribunal, it stated that the crimes were not committed by abstract group, but very specific persons. So International Criminal Court works in the following way. There is a situation in Ukraine, but then there will be arrest warrants, not for some bodies, not for some groups of people, but for specific people. So Maria Lvova-Belova who is the documenter of her own crime, just like Putin was drawn to this crime site in Mariupol. In the same way, Maria Lvova-Belova was attracted to her crimes. She wanted to document her own crimes. So International Criminal Court already cooperates with the Ukrainian Office of Prosecutor General and with the joint investigation team in European Union. So there was a coordination model created there to gather effectively the information about the crimes and to support their expedited investigation. So in fact, it's just improvement of efficiency of this process, and even as a signal to Ukraine, they say, for example, we already opened a representative office here in your country, so it's about time you ratify the Rome Statute. So how to execute the arrest warrant for Maria Lvova-Belova? It's easier than with Putin. She is a person who is more likely to be arrested by 123 countries, and ICC and Interpol signed an agreement on cooperation back in 2013, and they cooperate in arrest of those people who are wanted internationally. So this increases the number of those countries who may arrest them is 195. I want to remind you that the United Nations organization comprises 194 countries, so it's those members of United Nations plus the Cook Islands. So Miss Maria is not going to receive her pension back home. She will be imprisoned. She has to receive that signal. Even the Russian Federation will send her to prison after the change of government. She's a young woman, and this arrest arrest warrant, it doesn't have the expiration term. Those crimes, they don't have the expiration term. She is in a dead-end situation. That's it for her. Actually, in case of Putin, the situation is more complicated, because we know that there are countries who wouldn't arrest him, and it was most painful for us in case of Hungary, because they're a member of EU, and they think that we would not read the agreement between ICC and European Union, and we wouldn't understand how it works. But the way it works is that Hungary is not capable of making decisions of their own. There are still international organizations like Eurojust who can capture Putin in Hungary, but they don't have joint border. Theoretically, Putin will have to use an airplane. So this airplane with Putin, it will be landed by any other country who would be happy to land his plane and receive, say, $5 million award from the Department of State of the United States. So Hungary is only trading for some concessions. Hungary is against any sanction package, against sanctions against persons. They only act as a friend of Putin. Orban acts as a friend of Putin. So anyway, it's just a matter of time when he would be detained. Also, you mentioned there is a number of other persons who should be brought to liability, but they are beyond the jurisdiction of International Criminal Court. So what should be the straight system of bringing those dozens of persons to liability? How it should be built? Well, Kateryna already mentioned about that. Is the implementation of principle of universal jurisdiction. So whom should we come to? Whom should we talk to? To whom should we apply to have them detained? So if a person is using the principle of universal jurisdiction, I mean the crimes which were committed outside of that specific country, so we can apply to the agencies which work in that country. For example, say some Russian governor comes to Ireland and there is a number of victims who were affected by the activities of those governors, the Ukrainian refugees. So any of them may come to a relevant agency of Ireland and to say that there is a person in that country who committed that war crime. So in fact we don't know how all of this story is going to end. We hope we will win and Russia will collapse. Maybe it will be related to the collapse of Russian regime, or maybe not. We all remember the destiny of Milosevic. No one could believe when his warrant was issued, and no one was believing that he would end up in the prison, but this is how his story ended. And another thing is cooperation of our government agencies with International Criminal Court. They should seek arrest of such persons so that they are arrested even outside of our territory. Well, another question, you mentioned genocide and cooperation with United Nations and the adjacent agencies. There was a resolution of the United Nations who said that they don't see genocide in the actions of Russia. This is what was on our press, that the vile United Nations say that there is no genocide in Ukraine. So what should your strategy be? What should we do and how should we do it to achieve the necessary result? Please, and what result should it be? First of all, I want to mention about the United Nations and about the commission that we cooperate with. We cooperated with them very actively, specifically about the deportation of the children and their forced handover to Russian families. They have their regulations, and the decision should be taken unilaterally. The debates over whether it was genocide or not, they were, and the committee would not stop its work. Its mandate will continue, and what's going to be shown what is going to be shown in their next report. We will see. So please don't condemn the international committee. Please check the statement of Karim Khan, which accompanies the warrant order. Those statements, like adoption forever, adoption as a part of a policy, it all shows that it's only qualified as a war crime on the first level. So all those activities may be qualified both in the resolution of UN committees. So we just have to encourage them to continue working, and we can support them with our evidences. But with regard to the International Criminal Court, there should be a normal attitude of Ukraine. It's our obligation according to the convention. We have to take our best efforts to prevent the crime of genocide. We have to take our best efforts to bring them to liability. We have the statement by the prosecutor of ICC, Karim Khan. We have evidences provided by the children themselves. We have the documents in compliance with which the children were handed over to Russian families. That should be enough, at least to initiate the discussion, at least at the level of International Court of United Nations. So again, it's just a matter of time. Do you understand what's the scale of this resolution of the International Criminal Court? The arrest warrant for a head of a nuclear country, one of the strongest countries of the world, during the hot phase of war, when they keep threatening with their nuclear weapons. And the fact that it mentions the notion of genocide, it's like it's a compromise resolution which is not final. I want to add a couple of words. I'm deeply convinced that all those bodies, all those organizations which document the crimes, who prepare the international statements, they're adequate. They can be communicated. If we don't communicate with them, if we get offended by them, if we continue saying something bad about them, we won't achieve anything. We have to continue convincing them. We have to continue to talk to them. I know it from my personal experience. When we were talking about the transportation of prisoners for the first time, it was perceived as something like, what are you telling us? But in a matter of a month, or maybe even less than a month, it already popped up in the report of the General Prosecutor of International Criminal Court. Okay, questions from the floor. Elena Litvinenko, Ukrinform, I'm having my first question. You mentioned that you are going to continue to cooperate with the UN committees as to the specific cases, giving them specific examples. So what resolutions may be provided by those committees, and what would be the advantages of Ukraine from that? And again, about the universal jurisdiction, certain persons may be arrested in the third countries upon the application of the affected persons. So, but a lot of people, they don't know who were the governors or who were the commissioners for children's rights back then. How do we communicate that information to them? In what way should we communicate and explain to them that they have this right to apply to those agencies? Well, we cooperate with the Committee for Human Rights too. Unfortunately, within those years we have not received any resolution with regard to the conflict of Ukraine, but we don't think that we should be disappointed about that, or we should stop working. Sooner or later, well, you know, we think about the victims, so that the victims get fair compensation, not just get the resolution of the committee that these are those persons ended up as victims and their rights were violated, but we hope this to be a fundamental to the demands to the aggressor state for the compensation. Maybe it will happen in 5 years, maybe in 10 years, or maybe just like in case of Germany, it would take decades. Well, as to the committees, they cannot arrest Putin, they cannot arrest other persons who commit war crimes, they solve other issues related to the violation of human rights and not those with the committing of crimes itself, but it's still a good mechanism whose resolution may be used in our global position related to the fact that what Russia does in Ukraine is a genocide. Thank you. I would like to add a couple of words in the context of the committees. Obviously, the matter of compensation is very important. We understand all the complications that Russian Federation may create, but I want you to evaluate this fact of recognition of the fact of who is the perpetrator, that of the existence of the crime itself. So the fact that we already have this fact of recognition of the crime itself, that when the community says that yes, this is the genocide, in the same way the ICC says that this is the violation of this article, which is related to violation of the rights of certain ethnic group by Russian Federation. So it's not something that a state may get out of it, but it's something that is related to compensation for personal compensation, some justice for some specific person. Well, I agree with my colleague that there is an algorithm missing, like who should go to which agency, apply to which agency, and how to submit that application, and so on and so forth. I wanted to say a couple of words about universal jurisdiction. There is a number of organizations working for the victim-focused approach. Unfortunately, now in those courts, the victim is not somebody who should be protected and whose rights should be reinstated. We want to change that. We take specific steps, communicating with the institutions of European Union. We try to say that we need some specific plan, step-by-step plan, where those victims should apply. We also communicate with the lawyers in those countries who mostly accept our citizens, and the children whom we were able to return from Russian Federation. It's dozens of kids who were returned to Ukraine from Russia, and then they left for the countries of European Union. They are the potential clients of such lawyers. They know who know their legal system, how to properly investigate those crimes. So we help them here. It's not like they should look for a lawyer back over there in Europe, but it's the lawyers who would look for them and find them. We also to communicate with the representatives of our diplomatic offices in Europe, so they could take care of it, because we know that when you come to another country, the first thing you get is a text message. Greetings from the Embassy of Ukraine in Czech Republic, for example, and here is our phone call. Please contact us in case of necessity. So those people who live for European countries, they should know that they should go to prosecutor's office. They should not walk around all those government offices carrying papers around. We encourage them to be the documentators of those crimes which were committed in their regard. This is how the mechanism of universal jurisdiction works, and thus the Commissioner for Children's Rights of Russian Federation would not be able to travel around European countries, or the governors, so they will be found over there. So we don't want the victim to run around the offices and knock on all the doors. They are minors. We're talking about minors here, and we don't want their parents or their foster parents to do the same. For the parents, the first thing, the top priority is to get the children study in schools, to have all the necessary documents submitted for billeting and so on and so forth. So we work to have those lawyers from European Union to find their potential clients, the victims of those crimes. Well, I want to add that it's not necessary to know specifically the person who committed a crime against that victim. The crime should only be reported if a person knows that there was a crime committed against them. We have to remember that universal jurisdiction is not a mechanism that is working by itself somehow. If a person comes to Germany and German prosecutors and police, they say, okay, we will initiate a proceedings here. It's the bilateral communication, bilateral cooperation. Those are the joint committees organized by the countries. For example, a person comes to that European country, they get registered as refugees from Ukraine and they're looking for refuge. So all those people, they are potential victims. They should be worked with. It's just an information, it's not necessary to interrogate every single person as they enter the country, but it's the bilateral process of cooperation, and the victims should keep in mind that they are victims and they should not necessarily know who are the perpetrators who committed crimes against them. Well, one specific step that I recommend for all the parents, for all the victims, I understand that financial issue may be critical, so in the website of International Criminal Court there is the form of application, the application form in Ukrainian language for compensation. Please find it, fill it in Ukrainian language. I don't know whether we may post a link under our broadcast, but if you don't apply as a victim, you receive nothing. Yes, you will obviously have to talk once, only once. Our justice system is very favors the kids to much extent, but there was a trend for a couple of weeks that the governments started making contributions to trust funds, including the United States, who are not even a member of Rome Statute. So all those funds will be processed under the program of support for the children. This is what Karim Khan mentioned, so act now already. Do we have any questions on the floor, please?
Добрый день, Chris Sampson, National Security Media. Two questions. Are there specific countries under Rome Statute that would be the strongest, most likely participants in holding Putin accountable? And number two, outside programs or organizations that are helping you track current exfiltration of citizens. For instance, in Bakhmut, we know that Wagner Group is trying to remove citizens often to Donetsk, etc. So basically, again, which strongest countries would be allies to help? And how are you getting outside help to monitor citizen movement?
So when we are talking about the first question, because the second one, maybe I need some explanation and clarification. So about the strongest partners, when we are talking about members of the Rome Statute, of course, it's the European Union. Because they even now demonstrate the strong support to these warrants, except of Hungary. But when we're talking about countries outside the Rome Statute, it's of course, and I'm sure that we can obtain the support of the United States, because this step of transfer of money to the trust fund, and also I have participated in some round table organized by the State Department. They are ready to cooperate. Maybe they are not ready to, for example, arrest Putin, but they are ready to help with the investigation, also with the collection of information, gathering and building of evidence, case building, of course. And maybe if they are not ready to send Putin to the Hague, they are ready to arrest him themselves, because they have this law on war crime, and they have the principle of the universal jurisdiction, so they can do it. So of course, it's the United States.
Just another thought that it's important to understand that not only several countries as a state parties of the Rome Statute can do something. It's important to have international cooperation. Yeah, we understand that several states can do it better, can ensure that this mechanism will work. But it's important that all states around the world are ready to do it, because Putin will not go to the United States or United Kingdom. He will go only to the countries that they will not be ready to arrest him, or they will show it for him. And it's important to pursue these countries to be ready to arrest him.
And I would like also to precise that, for example, the European Union, they have many agreement, free trade agreement and also association agreement, and all this agreement includes the so-called human rights clause and also the clause related to the prosecution of international crimes. So they can use this mechanism in order to ensure the exercise of this decision related to the arrest warrants. So I am sure that they can do it, and this is another question when, for example, the European Union tells you, we will suspend this association of free trade agreement, we will suspend our financial assistance if you refused to send Putin to the Hague, to send Maria Lvova-Belova to the Hague. So now we can tell that these two persons, they are like captured, they are detained in Russia, only in this country.
Окей, якщо питань більше нема, от на цій оптимістичній ноті.
Well, good. On this optimistic note, if there are no more questions, well, sir.
Second question.
Yeah, clarification on the second question. So, for instance, the news yesterday or in the last 24 hours was that Wagner Group has been exfiltrating or removing citizens from Bakhmut further into Donetsk. The same thing we've seen elsewhere. Do you have outside organizations that sort of like third-party observers are able to help Ukraine track, movement of people? Yeah.
Finally, I understand. So, unfortunately, the Russian Federation limits access to all these processes. So even, for example, the ICRC or UNICEF or some other specific international organization, independent organization, is not able to track, to trace the fate of these children, namely, or even adults transferred to other occupied territories or to Russia. So unfortunately, we don't have such a network, but we have others. For example, we have some volunteers even in the territory of the Russian Federation or in the territories under control of the Russian Federation, who can tell us not in details like names and surnames of these people deported, but at least like numbers, how many or where they were deported, in which facilities. And also, of course, we thanks and we are extremely grateful for all journalists with which we are cooperating, because they help us to collect very important evidence. They have managed even to interview Russian families who adopted Ukrainian children. So you are cool. This arrest warrants is also your achievement.
Тоді на цьому ми будемо закінчувати. Дякуємо.
Well, this is how we are going to wrap up. I want to thank our guests. Our next briefing is in 7 minutes, and we will talk about tuberculosis. See you shortly.